What's the best way to make a small fortune in the stock market? Start off with a big fortune. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. When the murders started, my mom called me telling me that she wanted me to move back home until they caught the killer. I told her no. It wasn't that I didn't want to go back home to Michigan and escape from my busy life in San Francisco for a while. I did. But I couldn't. As much as I loved my family, my life was in San Francisco now, and I couldn't just up and leave because my mother was afraid I was going to be murdered by a serial killer. I had a job, and an important one at that. I was a doctor, but not just any doctor. I was the doctor who worked with the police department and helped determine how someone or something died. I hadn't had many interesting cases with the police. Mostly drownings and broken necks from really nasty falls. These murders were pretty much the highlight of my career, as morbid as that sounds. They started a little after the 1st of January of 2017. The first victim was a 23-year-old female. She was fresh out of college with a degree in computer sciences. Her name was Adeline Harper. To say her body had been mutilated would be an understatement. This poor girl had been slaughtered. She had a slashed throat and abdomen. Her back, neck, thighs, and legs were covered in deep cuts and scratches. Her arms and face were dotted with black, blue, yellow and green bruises. Whoever had killed this girl sure wanted to make sure that they got the job done. One of the officers told me that they found her with her eyes open. They had closed them. He told me that all he saw when he looked into her eyes was pure terror, which wasn't abnormal to hear. A person would obviously be pretty fucking terrified if they were about to be brutally slaughtered. I couldn't help but overheard some of the officers talking while I was examining her body, and they said that the neighbor had called 911 because he heard a loud, terrifying scream come from Adeline's apartment next door. The only thing the cops couldn't figure out is how there wasn't any footage on the apartment building's security cameras of anyone entering Adeline's apartment around the time the neighbor heard the scream and she was murdered. In fact, the only person documented entering and editing Adeline's apartment that entire day was Adeline. Only Adeline. A week and a half later, the neighbor who called in Adeline's murder was killed. He had the same exact injuries, the same look of fear in his eyes when he was found, and his next-door neighbors called to report that they had heard a scream come from his apartment. Over the next month, that was the only pattern that was clear. Somebody's neighbor would hear a scream next door, call the cops. The cops would show up and find the body with all the same injuries. The people who were murdered never had anything in common. They were never close in age. They never had similar jobs or the same hair color, eye color, anything. It was as if this sicko was killing just for the hell of it. Then again, maybe he or she was. I wouldn't put it past a serial killer to kill for a little fun. However, in early April, after almost 17 murders, someone survived. His name was Eric Roberts. He was 25 and worked for a construction company. The police questioned him as I was tending to his injuries. He said that he was getting ready to take a shower when he heard it. A scream. A scream so loud it was almost deafening. He turned around, and the next thing he knew, he was being tackled to the ground and cut up and scratched and beaten. The police asked if he saw the killer's face, and he said no, because the killer didn't have a face. Apparently, it was a dark figure with nothing but deep, black emptiness that was its eyes. It didn't have a mouth or any of their facial features, but he could tell that it was angry and demented. He said it didn't have legs. It floated above the ground and wore a dark cloak. It had demon-like hands with claws that could slice right through a person. The police obviously didn't believe him and told him that his mind was just making things up to help ease the blow of the trauma. He swore he was telling the truth, but still, nobody believed him. Eric was set to stay at the local hospital for a week for observation over his injuries. However, on the first night, Eric flatlined in the middle of the night. Nobody knew how, but a couple of nurses claimed to hear a scream throughout the halls before Eric's heart stopped. Guess who turned up dead a week after Eric died? Those very nurses who heard the scream. The police had questioned other people and asked if they had heard any scream over the last 2.5 months the murders had been happening, and everyone always said no. Although I never really believed in the paranormal or anything like that, I knew one thing, and I'm sure all of the officers knew it too. If you heard the scream, you were the next to die. The murders began to get more morbid as the weeks went on. Ever since Eric survived his attack and then was killed later on, whoever had been murdering all these people had added something onto their routine, and it made me sick to my stomach. Along with the injuries that were always found on the bodies of the victims that were killed, their heart was always found next to them on the floor, and a big hole would be in the victim's chest. This had been the case with nearly 17 victims already. And more as the months went on without even a person of interest is found. The police were stumped. They had no idea how a human being could rip another human's heart from their chest. They didn't know how they hadn't gotten close to finding whoever was murdering all these innocent people either. It had been almost 8 months since the first murder, and there had been more than 20 bodies found in that time frame. The people were beginning to lose their faith in the police and didn't feel protected or safe in their own homes anymore. Some people moved out of town and went wherever the hell they wanted to go as long as they knew they were getting out of here. No human has the strength to rip a heart out, so really there was only one explanation, and that was that whoever was killing these people wasn't human, but the police said there was no way and that it was impossible and that it was unrealistic for the murderer to be anything but a human. It just made the most sense. The unknown freaked people out. Whenever they can't explain something, they get scared. So that's why everyone is convinced that whoever, or whatever, is killing these people is nothing more than a mentally deranged human being who likes to kill. It's easier for them to process if you can even process that in your head. Whenever I heard them talking about it, my mind would drift to the description Eric made of the murderer. It always sent shivers down my spine whenever I thought about it and imagined it in my head. It wasn't a pretty sight. I'm really not a big believer when it comes to the supernatural and demonic entities, but if I saw something like that, I don't know what I would do. Then again, if I saw whatever the thing was that Eric claimed that he saw, I most likely wouldn't live to tell the tale. Seeing as if Eric was telling the truth about what he saw the first night he was attacked, this demonic thing was not leaving any survivors. In all honesty, I was stumped too. And scared. Not just for my life but for the lives of everybody around me. Any one of them could be the next victim since there was still no pattern in the murders that the police could pinpoint. I had been working my ass off. Not only with examining the victims' bodies, but working at the local hospital on top of that. I wasn't a cop. I was only their doctor, so I never got to witness any of the action or fun stuff as it's called in movies and TV shows. I was driving home from work after a long shift one night when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I looked in all of my mirrors and out all of my windows, and I didn't see anything out of the ordinary or strange. I brushed it off as my car being too cold, so I turned the AC in my car down and continued my drive back to my loft apartment. I arrived at my apartment around 1 in the morning. I kicked my shoes off and hung my jacket on my coat rack by the front door. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let out a heavy sigh before pulling my hair from its very tight ponytail on my head and letting it flow free. Finally, I walked over to my couch and plopped down onto it, kicking my feet up and lying down. I grabbed the remote control on the coffee table and turned the TV so I could connect to Netflix and catch up on my shows. I had just finished an episode of The Vampire Diaries when I suddenly got the feeling that I was being watched. I quickly paused the next episode that had begun to play and shot up from the couch. I looked all around me and checked all the rooms in my loft. I found nothing and no one. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the app that was connected to my security cameras. I looked through the last hour of footage very carefully, looking for anything or anyone that didn't belong in my apartment. Once again, I found nothing. Everything was as it was and where it was supposed to be. I told myself I was being paranoid and to forget about it because it was most likely nothing. With a huff, I set my phone down on my kitchen counter and went back into my living room area to continue watching Netflix. Around 3 in the morning, I decided I should probably go to sleep even though I didn't have to work the next day. I turned my TV off and climbed up the stairs to my bedroom. I took a quick shower and threw my wet hair up into a very messy bun. I changed into my pajamas and climbed underneath my comforter on my queen-size bed. I closed my eyes and quickly fell asleep. I woke with a start and sat up in my bed. I looked at my alarm clock and it said it was 4:30 p.m. in the morning. I looked around my room and fear set in the pit of the stomach when I realized what had woken me up. A scream.